Hi everyone, welcome back to Liz Sews. Today in the US is Mother's Day, and even though I didn't start sewing until, probably more than a decade after leaving home, I would still credit my mother as being the person who started the seed in me to start sewing. So I thought it would be nice to sort of share with you some of the quilts that she has made. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive showcase of everything she's done. These are just the quilts that happen to live with me in Denver. She lives on the other side of the country in Virginia. So I have a couple of quilts that always remind me of home, and it always just feels like sort of wrapping yourself in love, because I know that she spent so much time and energy into making these. So let's get started. The first quilt that I have right here is sort of just like a brown scrappy quilt. It uses lots of different colors, fabrics, and pieces. And this is sort of like a small quilt, and I use this. See, when she made this quilt for me, it was from my apartment in Denver, and this was like the quilt that I used just to cover up on the couch. It has some fun features. Let's see. So this is the corner of the quilt, and you can see how it has this little pocket here, and I believe it has this pocket on the two opposing corners. And the idea is that you can sort of tuck your feet in there just to make sure that your feet always stay warm and never comes off of your feet. But this quilt was completely done on machine, so it is a very sturdy quilt. For the longest time I had it in my car. When we go to see fireworks on the 4th of July, this is the quilt that I'll bring to sort of like lay on the ground, because it's really sort of a rough and tumble quilt that can handle being washed and just a little bit rougher wear to it. So this next one is called a Convergence quilt, and this is a wall hanging. Now, when I moved into this sewing room about a year ago, I moved in my sewing room into this room, and the intention has always been to paint it, and then I wanted to hang this quilt probably right here where this IKEA print is. But I love this wall hanging. This is the first Convergence quilt that my mom did, and she says that she always sees there's mistakes in it, because I guess like the binding got a little wavy and stuff like that. But I really love the colors. I love how it looks. So yes, this is one of my favorites. Also, you'll notice a lot of purples, and I will say that I personally am not a huge purple fan, but it is one of my mom's favorite colors, so I think that's why you see so many purples in her quilts. This next quilt is sort of near and dear to my heart. It is a Celtic knot quilt, and this used to belong to my grandmother. It was what was on her bed, and I believe it was a wedding gift for her second wedding, that my mom made it for her second wedding. But my grandmother passed away a few years ago, and so I took this quilt because it was really sentimental to me. I really love this. I think it's cool that every single block is a different knot, so they're all different, and they are actually Celtic knots. So my mom, when she sewed it, she made sure that each pass of the fabric goes under and then over and then under and then over. And that is the way that you can tell that a real Celtic knot, because it means if the fabric passes over and then under alternating, then it will make a knot if you were to, pull it. So it has seen some better days. It definitely has some sun damage on the green, but I still really love it, and I keep this on the bed in our guest room now. So this next quilt is quite graphic, and it's what I keep in the room right now that I'm sitting in my sewing room, just because I have a lot of gray and red in this room, so I think this quilt goes well with that sort of scheme. This has a cool background on it. It's kind of trippy, 70s disco. And then the fabric that was put on the back of this quilt wasn't quite big enough, so there is a slash of extra red and black in there just to sort of get that backing fabric to sort of stretch out to what it needed to be. So this one has a lot of hand quilting on it, and I will give you guys a close-up. And it's done in what is considered sort of like a, I don't know the technical term for it, but I always think of it as like ripples in a water. So it like emanates out from a specific spot and just repeats, 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 and repeats. Usually likes to sleep on this quilt an awful lot because it's the quilt that's always in my sewing room, so that's probably why he wanted to say hello. This next quilt will definitely prove that my parents are nerds, or at least my mother is a nerd or geek. This is the nested dissection quilt, and this is actually a pictorial representation of an algorithm that is used to handle repeating zeros in really, really large matrices. So like matrix of like 1,000 by 1,000. Big stuff. So it helps you deal with it. So one fond memory I have when she was making this quilt is it must have been about like 10 or 15, and she had somewhere in that age range, and she had printed out multiple copies of the nested dissection. And then I got all of my crayons out and I just colored them in, and we did tons of them in different colorways just to get an idea for how it would look. And of course, because it was my mom, she ended up picking the purple colorway. The next quilt is another Celtic knot quilt, and this one uses batik fabric with black Celtic knots on it. This one was made much later, and I really like this one a lot. I actually had another quilt that I owned, and it was sort of a Hawaiian quilt with lime green dolphins on a sort of aqua background, and I really, really loved that quilt, but it turned out that my cousin really loved it too. So my mom made a deal with me, and she said that if I was to give up the Hawaiian, I could pick whatever quilt I wanted. So I picked this one. This one has sort of like a cool thing about the border. It's notched, and that goes all the way around, and it follows the shape of the block. So I think that is kind of a neat feature. The back is purple because my mom made it. And it's just this beautiful like ombre sort of purple. And this is the gate quilt, and this is a twin size. So I had this made probably when I was in high school, I believe, and this was one that I had specifically asked for. I saw a book about gate quilts in a quilting store, and I made her buy the book, and then I sketched out this black portion. So the idea is that it's like a wrought iron gate, and that you're seeing sort of this landscape in the background. So I had sketched out the gate portion of how I wanted it to look, hand draw it, and then she was able to load that into like electronic quilt, I think is the program, and convert it into a pattern that she then used. So this is all hand appliqued on top, and then the background was colors of my choosing, which is just this nice blue sky with just this sort of field in the bottom. This quilt does have a saying that has been hand quilted along the border. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's kind of embarrassing, but this quilt has a lot of sentimental value just because it's something that I designed and that she brought to life. This is just a small little quilt. I think I asked, at the time I was putting my computer on a walnut piece of furniture in order to watch TV, and I was concerned that my computer might scratch the furniture. So I asked my mom to make a computer mat because she had previously made for me something called a mug rug, which is just like a coaster, like a quilt coaster. But this is like a mug rug, but bigger for my computer, just so I didn't have to worry about it scratching anything. And it has some cool, interesting details with the pumpkin. It looks like it's like, has an overlay. I don't know what it is. It is probably organza. And then there's just little cut up chunks of fabric that is like sandwiched inside there. And then you can see that there's some, this thread around the exterior of the pumpkin is actually made of like little filaments from Indian saris, and she picked this up when we were vacationing in Seattle together. Another sort of small-ish quilt is the Zentangle quilt, and this is one that she made, I think it was part of her art quilt group, and just like studying different techniques. It just says Zentangle, that's all it says on the background, but it has some stuff hand drawn in there, as well as some free motion quilting, and then the back has just some black and white batik. And the last quilt is the one that is the most recent addition to my household. She finished this, I want to say, last year. It took her 3 years to make it, and she said this is going to be the last quilt she does by hand. So I have the last hand quilted quilt by Susan Crotterfield. And this is what goes in my master bedroom. And it is a picture of Bear Creek Lake, and very similar to the gate quilt. It has this tree that's been hand appliqued on in the foreground, and then you have this nice scene in the background. And I think that this is a photograph that my grandfather took of in a vacation at Bear Creek Lake, and I just fell in love with the photograph, and she sort of turned it into a quilt for me.
So the rest of the video is just a highlight reel of some of her quilts. Again, not exhaustive, but I hope you guys have enjoyed getting a peek into my mom's unique talent, and I will see you next time.